You can't always get what you want. The radio screamed at top volume as we blasted down the highway. What the hell was that? I said, frenzied, looking behind us at the dark road. That wasn't anywhere near what the plan was. It's fine, it worked, didn't it? Ryan reassured, making sure the gas pedal was firmly planted on the floor. And besides, we got away and there's no one the wiser. His truck wasn't the best getaway vehicle, but in a pinch it would do fine. Besides, it hadn't failed on us yet. A half an hour later, after walking the rest of the distance, the apartment looked like an oasis in a desert. We dragged ourselves up the 3 flights of stairs and collapsed through the door. Ryan headed toward the kitchen. I'm gonna check the fridge and get a drink. You want something? I glared at him. What do you think? I asked, my exhausted voice hinting at annoyance. Just being polite. I'll bring you some water or something, he defended before disappearing through the doorway. I moved to the couch and committed myself to the act of sitting when I realized the door wasn't locked. I sighed and groaned my way back to standing. What's with all the pain noise? I heard from the kitchen. We forgot to lock the door. I'm just going to lock it. I stretched my back and walked over to the door. We should be fine. I bet no one even noticed it's missing, Ryan yelled over the faucet. I rolled my eyes and reached out to turn the lock. Before I could, the door opened hard into my hand. I reeled back, fingers in pain, and looked through the frame, currently filled with darkness. I focused my eyes, and the darkness turned out to be black coats that took up the whole doorway. The coats pushed inside, and I noticed they were filled with 2 men, a half-foot taller than the frame. They ducked through without a sound, and stood, hunched and looking at me through gray, unblinking eyes. Along with their black overcoats, they wore black pants and black boots. Ryan? I squeaked. Ryan rounded the corner. It's cool, I got your what? He stopped at the sight of the men. We all stood there in silence for an eternity, but as the wall clock informed me, it was only around 30 seconds. Ryan broke the silence. Well, I love having guests, but I think it's a bit late, so would you mind...
Return the Zlursa to us now.
The men cut him off, speaking in unison. We looked at each other. I tried to develop telepathy and tell him we should run. He nodded, and I was floored. Maybe he had heard me. I turned back, tensing my muscles, and prepared to bolt through the front window to my left. I steeled myself and... We have no idea what you're talking about. Ryan spoke up and I lost all momentum. I stood there, mouth open, gesturing for him to stop. He winked at me and continued. I've never even heard of a Clarissa. And furthermore, I find it rude of you to just break into my home and accuse my friend and I of stealing. With a grand sweeping gesture and a harsh finger jab to bookend his point, a small metallic device shook out of his jacket pocket and gently bounced on the carpet. Everyone stared at it. I decided I should take the initiative for once and grabbed the table lamp next to me, threw it hard at the closer guy. This didn't seem to faze him. This was nice. We'll have to do it again sometime, I yelled as I ran towards Ryan. I tried to reach down and grab the thing as I ran by, but ended up kicking it into the kitchen. I resigned to my poor hand-eye coordination and grabbed Ryan by the shoulder and dragged him with me. I heard them walking after us.
You will return the Zlursa to us,
they said together again. That was really unnerving, but I decided to be freaked out about it later. We stopped and tried to find where it had rolled after I kicked it. How did they get here so fast? I almost screamed. Our neighbors were going to complain again. Ryan went towards the fridge. It was the most likely place. The kitchen floor was tilted towards it. I don't know. We had a great head start. Probably when we had to walk the 2 miles after the truck died, he said, arm shoulder deep under the fridge. I looked around for a weapon. It would probably be a while till he found the thing. Everything we ever dropped in this room ended up under there somehow. I reached for the rolling pin my mother gave us as a moving-in gift. Every house needs one, she had said. I brushed the 3-year-old dust off and hefted it, realizing she was right. I sidled up to the opening and readied myself. They must have been really slow if they hadn't gotten in here yet. The apartment isn't that big. Just then an arm blew through the wall next to me. I'd like to say I ducked out of the way, but really I flinched and then tripped on one of the many stale meatballs that now littered the floor, courtesy of Ryan's frantic searching. I dropped the rolling pin in the process as I landed hard on the tile. In a haze I looked up to see the arm retract through the wall, and for one of them to walk into the kitchen over me. I reached around to find the rolling pin, grabbed the first thing I could and threw it at the man. A stale meatball bounced off his forehead. He did not blink, and proceeded to reach down and lift me up to his eye level.
Give us the Zlursa now. There isn't much time left.
His cold tone felt inhuman. I started to speak, but just as I did, Ryan popped into view behind him with the rolling pin. I stammered, unable to say whatever cool action line I had thought I'd never get to use. With the force of one 26-year-old, Ryan brought the makeshift weapon down on the arm holding me. The tall man registered no pain or emotion, just a cold, unflinching stillness. Ryan looked at me, and I shrugged.
"Well, try all options,"
he said, and began to tickle the giant, holding me. "Ryan, why on earth?" I started, but being dropped to the floor interrupted me. The stone-faced man giggled and flinched, backing up to try and avoid the relentless assault. I sat for a minute, baffled, until Ryan cleared his throat and broke my daze. I stood up, grabbing the discarded rolling pin, more for comfort at that point, and followed Ryan and his giggling prey. After he pushed the large, ticklish man back into the living room, Ryan grabbed me and bolted towards the door. The other one reached for us, but now I put my earlier plan into action and jumped out the window and onto the walkway. Ryan following right behind, tearing his pants on the broken glass. I helped him up, noticing the blinds rustling in our neighbors' windows, wondering what was happening. We ran down the stairs with the two men yelling after us.
You fools, we are running out of time.
"We gotta get a better weapon than that,"
Ryan said as he eyed the rolling pin with disappointment. "We should probably thank my mom for giving it to us," I replied. We were sitting at a bus station downtown. We discussed where to go while we ran and came to the conclusion that we wanted to be near a lot of people. It wasn't too late, so the main part of town was still alive with activity. More eyes, and maybe they would leave us alone for a bit while we figured out what we were going to do. Ryan hopped up.
"Well, let's get up to our roof. We want to be ready."
I stood up and scanned our surroundings. "Do you remember when it's supposed to happen?" I asked, my eye settling on a building that looked like it had easy access to its roof.
"They said tonight. I'll assume it hasn't happened yet, though."
I rolled my eyes and walked towards the building. "Let's just get up there." After a small argument with the security guard, where Ryan claimed we were duct workers who happened to like working at night, we stepped out onto the roof. The night was just reaching cool, and the sky was clear, the full moon giving us ample light. This time I made the smart decision to block the door. I spent a few minutes looking around and found some loose bricks and cinder blocks and piled them up as a makeshift barricade. It wasn't much, but maybe it would give us some time. I walked over to check on Ryan, almost getting hit in the face and falling in the process as he spun around and stuck his hand out.
"So I've been messing with it. I figure we should know how to use it before we have to learn by panicking."
I looked up at his hand from my laying position and realized he was holding the thing they called the Zlursa. He looked down at me.
"What are you doing down there?"
I glared up at him.
"Oh, just enjoying the night."
My voice bordered on anger.
"This may not be the best."
"Just shut up. Have you figured it out yet?" I got up and brushed myself off, and Ryan showed me the Zlursa. This was the first time I'd gotten a good look at it. If you didn't know what it was, you could confuse it for a toy. It was small and metallic, around the size of a golf ball, with one side jutting out in a rectangle, with a few small buttons and a screen. It looked unreal. Ryan gestured to the little screen.
"So I think it's mostly controlled by thought, because these buttons just cycle through different screens that I can't understand at all."
"Well, alright," I said, gesturing for him to continue. "Then try to think about it being a gun, I guess." He squinted his eyes in a show of concentration, and I tensed in anticipation. Enough time passed that I started to wonder if it would work. He heaved an angry sigh that made me jump.
It's not working. I don't know if we can do this. Ryan slumped down defeated and looked up at the stars. I tried to think of what to do. We had to find a way to get it to work. I moved towards Ryan, who was at the edge of the roof, to take a turn, when a loud cracking sound from behind stopped me in my tracks. I turned and my fears were realized. The door to the roof was being folded in half over the pile of assorted bricks I had heaped in front of it, and I saw one of the two large men from before through the frame. If I could see one of them, the odds are they were both there. I was gonna say let me try, but I think we're out of time. I prodded Ryan in the shoulder and pointed towards our big friend set on a reunion. He jumped up and spun to face the door, slipping slightly. Here, I'll trade you. He grabbed the rolling pin from me and pushed the Zlursa in my hands. I'll try to hold them off. You try and get it to work. The two men repeated in unison.
Time is short. Please return the Zlursa.
Ryan looked back at me. What they said, minus the returning part. He trailed off as he moved toward the man sticking out of the half-bent door, rolling pin in hand. I put all my focus on the device in my hands, trying my best not to panic. I tried all the buttons, and just as Ryan said, they seemed to just cycle the screen. Some sort of data, and then a graph, and then a small list of words I couldn't read. Loud shouting broke my concentration. I looked up to see Ryan swinging the rolling pin wildly at one of the two men, who was holding him up by the arm. Just as I made sense of that, I noticed the other one had almost gotten to me. I always did have a problem noticing things when I was focusing. We had no time left, so I tried reasoning. Please, we're trying to stop the world from being destroyed. I braced myself for being grabbed. To my surprise, the man stopped in his tracks, and after a moment with nothing happening, he spoke.
You speak of the Noskia?
Stunned, I looked to Ryan. He had stopped struggling and stared at us. He nodded toward the man, and I took that to mean keep talking. I don't know what you're talking about. The man stood for a moment, almost like he was a really slow computer trying to find a file. Then he spoke again.
You spoke of saving the world. Please elaborate.
I sighed. We were told that something was coming from space that was going to destroy the planet and that we could stop it with this thing. I held up the Zlursa, my hand shaking from anxiety. He paused again, and I wondered how long before talking to these guys was going to drive me nuts. He then replied, We have the same goal. We were tasked to destroy the being known as the Noskia. We were in the process of making the preparations when you stole the Zlursa from us. I stood in silence, mouth hanging open. Ryan coughed. Could you put me down, since we're on the same side and all? The other man, after another pause, set Ryan down, and we all gathered in the center of the roof. Ryan started, All right, since we're all trying to do the same thing, and you know what it's called, what do we do now? In unison, the men said,
The Noskia will arrive imminently. We are unable to return to base, so we must set up the Zlursa here. It will be underpowered, but should be sufficient to destroy the Noskia. Please hand the Zlursa to us.
I looked nervously between them, then to Ryan. He shrugged, so I picked one at random and handed it over. They immediately walked over to the edge of the roof. I followed and asked, So how do you get it to work? We tried everything we could think of. What followed was the most complicated and baffling series of actions that I honestly can't remember them all. The parts I actually do remember were him twisting it and pulling the rectangle out. After they were done, the small device was unrecognizable aside from the small screen. It was what I could only describe as a sort of cannon with two tuning forks on the end, about the size of a desk chair. With their job accomplished, they both turned to us and said again in unison,
The Zlursa is now ready to be fired. Unfortunately, we are both out of energy and will shut down in 47 seconds.
Ryan piped up behind me. So you're both robots? They cut him off.
We have no time. The Noskia is approaching from the left side of the moon.
I looked up and squinted. I barely made out what looked like a star getting a little bigger. I looked back at one of the men. You're gonna shoot it then, right?
We are out of time. One of you will have to fire at it. You must wait until it is close, and aim for...
And just like that, they both stopped mid-word. I looked to Ryan. He always had a plan. He was just staring up towards the moon. I hesitated and turned to see what he was looking at. The object I saw before was much bigger, and I started to make out details. From here it looked like a huge white ball. As it got closer, I could see more. To my horror, I watched the ball open up, and I saw teeth. I didn't keep watching. I turned to shake Ryan out of his daze. He looked at me.
"Well, what are you waiting for?"
he said, panic in his voice. "Me?" I yelled. "Why can't you shoot it?"
"You're always better shot with the dart guns. You have to."
He pushed me towards the cannon. I turned to face it, shaking with fear. I looked up and I saw it much more clearly. It was like a worm. A huge worm with massive teeth. And all along it were what looked like eyes, too many to count, staring down toward us. I looked down at the gun and grabbed the controls. I assumed the trigger-like buttons were what I needed to hit, so I aimed it up at the approaching doom. I was sweating so much the controls were hard to hold. "Ryan, when should I... shoot?" My voice cracked as I wiped sweat on my pants. "They said to wait till it got close." I looked down the gun. "They also started to say something about where to shoot it." Ryan hadn't said anything, so I turned to look at him. He was making an exaggerated expression like he was thinking. I sighed. "Really? Now? Who were you doing that for? I should be focusing on the task of shooting a giant space worm." He looked at me and smiled.
"I'm trying to calm you down. You can do this."
I turned back around and re-aimed the gun. I was less tense. He always knew how to calm me down. Over my shoulder, I heard him say,
"Just try shooting it in the mouth. Maybe it'll explode or something."
I rolled my eyes and replied, "Better than no plan at all." I steadied myself for the shot. It was close enough that it was about the size of the moon. I took a deep breath and pressed the button. The Zlursa made a whining, whirring noise that became so loud it was almost unbearable. Just as I thought I couldn't take it anymore, the noise stopped and my vision was filled with a bright blue-green light. I blinked and focused my eyes and saw that it was a laser coming from in between the prongs. I looked at the worm thing and watched as the laser got closer. I did it! This was the moment that I saved the world. As I finished that thought, the laser hit the left side of the worm. Ryan walked up beside me, and we both followed it as it did not explode, but instead made a sharp turn directly into the moon. We watched in awe as it shattered the moon into pieces and continued across the sky, letting us see the full length of the creature. We could barely hear a sound like a dog whining as it flew on until we couldn't see it anymore. The two men then woke up like no time had passed.
The eye third from the left. It will then explode.
We looked over at them.
"I knew it would explode."
Ryan beamed. I sighed. "But you told me to aim at the wrong spot." We explained what happened while they were out, as they put the Zlursa away.
"So you deflected it into the moon. Unconventional, but it should not bother us for a while at least,"
they replied when we had finished. "But what about the moon?" I asked. "Don't we need that for the tide and stuff?"
"Also, people will wonder what happened," Ryan chipped in.
"Our employers will manufacture a story about a meteorite, as well as manufacture a replica to replace it. This should satisfy the general populace."
I felt relieved that I hadn't doomed the Earth, and Ryan, as if proving their point, seemed satisfied with their answer. "Alright, well, we're gonna head back to the apartment and clean up the damage, I guess." Ryan and I turned to leave, almost free of this madness.
"Halt! You two were informed of the Noskia's coming. Our employers will require knowledge of how."
We froze. I had almost forgotten about that fact. I looked to Ryan for what to do. He turned to face them.
"That's a long story. Can we talk about it later?"
I turned around to see what they would say. They stood there puzzled, and after a moment responded,
"You will inform us en route to the facility."
"What about our I tried, the men cutting me off yet again.
We will send a team to repair the damage, but this data must be retrieved."
Ryan and I sagged our shoulders. We were both too tired to argue or run away. That song flashed through my mind again. "All right," I started. "But we'll have to start from the beginning."